There are a number of ways of looking at the character of Ripley in Alien Resurrection, or more correctly, Ripley number 8. She begins as part of two worlds, part human, part alien, and it could be argued that Resurrection is the return journey that commenced but was unfinished in Alien 3. However, while she inhabits two worlds, she is master of neither. Like Alien 3, she has already travelled beyond the ordinary world into the unknown, effectively skipping the first couple of steps in the journey. However, as we learn later, she had 7 more sisters that were born before her story commenced. Each one of these was called to adventure, and each one refused to give the United Systems military, replacing the departed company, the ultimate boon that Ripley had died with on Fiorina 200 years earlier, the Alien Queen. Supernatural aid comes in the form of Ripley's successful cloning. Rather than being given a talisman or some knowledge to help Ripley on her as yet undefined quest, the aid comes in the form of Ripley's actual existence. An existence that has given her traits that could be construed as supernatural, passed on at a genetic level from the alien. She has superhuman strength and senses, acid blood, and some memories of her former life. However, another angle is that after this pre-existential call to adventure, another one occurs. Aptly calling Ripley to adventure is Call. She realizes it's too late to kill the Queen inside Ripley, so asks for her help, which Ripley of course refuses. Supernatural aid comes in the form of Ripley's acid blood, which she uses to escape her cell while the escaped aliens are bashing down the door. And thus she commits to her quest, that of getting off the Auriga, by literally crossing the threshold of a secret door from her cell. The belly of the whale is represented by the Auriga itself, complete with guardians, its ribbed exterior not only conjuring images of the insides of a beast, but also facehunger fingers, or the external ribcage of the alien itself. On the subject of imagery, Alien Resurrection shares a religious look with Alien 3, but beyond the chapel Ripley and Call later visit, it is not as obvious as the Christian fundamentalist order led by Dylan. Beyond the obvious link with the film's title and the return to life of its main protagonist, we also have a corruption of the Catholic Sacred Heart, the cross shape of the Auriga's docks and the Betty ascending toward a crown of thorns. The Betty itself is a cross shape. There's another cross shape, and another, and another. The character named Christie sacrifices himself that his friends might live. Call is reborn, dripping wet as if she's been baptized, her side pierced in the same area that Christ's was. Stigmata. Even Ripley's number 8 is the symbolic Christian number for rebirth. It's interesting to note at what point Ripley is set on the path of her journey. In Alien, the call to adventure, where Dallas tells them about the transmission, occurs around 11 minutes in. In Aliens, Burke asking Ripley to go to LV-426 is around 20 minutes. In Alien 3, Ripley is just generally waiting for something to start, while doing some bits of investigating for around 45 minutes until she learns the truth from Bishop, but is effectively stopped from taking any real action until Andrews is killed 55 minutes in. In Resurrection, Call goes to Ripley's cell at the 30-minute mark. All aspects that may factor into audience reaction. The road of trials is fairly straightforward. Ripley shoots an alien because it was in her way, an obstacle to be overcome. Shortly after, we learn that the Auriga is headed for USM home base on Earth. Pirates don't want to be around when the authorities retake the ship, and Call wants to go one step further and ensure that the aliens don't make it to Earth at all. One of the major trials is the swim through the flooded kitchen, almost literally linking to the belly of the whale, with the kitchen being at the bottom of the ship. It also links into the Christian imagery where all the characters go through a baptism. They swim toward a narrow opening in an elevator well, akin to a birth canal, and are stopped by alien hive webbing, not unlike an amniotic sac already seen with the Queen and Ripley. Other labour imagery include a push towards birth, and Ripley getting a cord wrapped around her neck, which she then bites off. Although Call is first to the exit, it is up to Ripley to break the waters, so to speak, so they can be reborn. However, none of them are purified or have their sins washed away. Hillard seeks to leave her grief behind her, but this catches up with her in the form of an alien, and she is dragged away. The rest have the sin of delivering hostages to be used as hosts for the aliens, and their sins await them in the form of alien eggs. They are reborn with the intent to be used in turn to birth more aliens. Only after the eggs are destroyed and Call returns to the womb is her sin of lying to her crewmates lifted, and she is reborn as her true self, a robot. Instead of embracing the newly baptized Call, however, the survivors view her as less than she was. Jonna, his physical scars indicative of his sins, views her as a hunk of plastic. Vrees, the unhealed cripple, feels betrayed by his close friend not confiding in him. DeStefano, originally in league with the USM, sees her as an object, a rare piece of equipment or collectible toy. Also note that DeStefano comes into contact with the carcass of a pig in the kitchen, an unclean animal in both the Jewish and Muslim faiths. Purvis, still carrying his corruption, is indifferent. Ripley maintains her ambiguity. The meeting with the goddess is less clear. The obvious choice for the goddess is Call, and while Ripley is not uncaring toward her, telling her to leave because the guards are looking for her, there is nothing that could be called unconditional love. However, there is something more akin to love when Ripley encounters what is left of her 7 sisters, the 7th of which is still alive and in pain. Despite being described as emotionally autistic, Ripley is moved to tears at the sight of Ripley 7's suffering, placing a sheet over a wound where plastic tubes enter the latter's body as if to try and give her some form of dignity. She euthanizes number 7 and destroys all the earlier dead specimens, and then threatens Dr. Wren, the architect of the horrors, but holds back in acting against him. This should not be misconstrued as atonement with the father, as Wren, being held at gunpoint by the Betty pirates, holds no real power to impart to Ripley at this point. However, Call shows her empathy for Ripley, not only by handing her the flamethrower that destroyed the clones, but also punching Wren in the face. The temptation for Ripley may be the sequence where she is taken to the alien's nest without resisting. Despite her dual nature, she has up to this point been siding with the humans, but after hearing the Queen in pain, she is seemingly quite content to go with the aliens when they rip the floor out from underneath her. If there is a temptation to stay in the nest, Ripley quickly discards it when the newborn emerges and kills both the Queen and Dr. Gettyman. She is given an inkling the new creature won't harm her, and apparently only her, yet she flees, perhaps out of fear, or more likely out of the fact that Call rigged the Auriga to crash and she'd rather not be on board when that happened. And speaking of Call crashing the ship, this could be atoning with the father, not least of all because the ship's computer is actually named Father. As with previous atonement steps in other films, there is no actual atonement here. Power is taken by Ripley rather than it being shared. Call tries to scuttle the ship by overloading the engines, but when that proves impossible, Ripley instructs her to crash the ship instead, using Call, revealed to be an android, in much the same way someone would use a computer to access a network. Although it was initially Call's mission to kill Ripley and destroy the aliens, both now have a common purpose, and the journey is shared. Apotheosis comes in the form of a brief rest in the chapel, where Ripley questions Call's motives, and Call responds that, even though she and her fellow Autons rebelled, she is still more or less a slave to her programming. Call's successful hacking of Father becomes the ultimate boon, giving them power over the fate of the aliens and the USM's plans for them. Refusal of the return can come in 2 forms: Ripley's willingness to go with the aliens who abduct her, and Call not wanting to leave without her. Similarly, many of the remaining steps of the journey are shared between Ripley and Call. The magic flight when Ripley uses her superhuman strength to leap from the Auriga's dock into the Betty's hatch, which was opened by Call, rescue from without, and crosses the return threshold. Call's own magic flight can be said to be the departure of the Betty from the Auriga, crossing the threshold of the Auriga's airlock, and she is then rescued from without by Ripley from the stowaway newborn. Ripley, however, is the sole master of 2 worlds. With the previous power structure of Elgin, Christie, or even Wren gone, she is clearly the leader of the survivors, and her alien nature enables her to dispose of the newborn, even though her betrayal of the creature pains that aspect of her personality. It is another illustration that even though this is not the human Ellen Ripley, she uses her alien side, using the acid blood to decompress the ship, while simultaneously rejecting her alien side and expelling it into the void. Both Ripley and Call now have the freedom to live without fear of death, for the obvious reasons, The aliens on the Auriga have been destroyed, along with those who created them, Gediman and Wren. However, we can go further. Call is free to live without fear of death because, as a robot, one that looks and acts more human than others that have gone before, she isn't actually alive. And while Ripley certainly has no desire to die, she has no fear of death because she's been dead before, and if they brought her back once, they can do it again.